What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review episode 5 of season 2 of Legion, an episode called Chapter 13. For those of you who follow my channel, I apologize for skipping episode 4 last week. It just came down to a situation where I was completely exhausted and too short on time. And I guess it's a good problem to have because right now there are far more shows and movies that I want to review than I actually have time to review. It's kind of like when it rains, it pours. Other times, like a month or so ago, I found myself twiddling my thumbs waiting for cool things to come out. At any rate, we got some great news a day or so ago where they announced that this season was actually going to be extended to 11 episodes. The final episode will air on June 12th, and apparently David is going to fight the future, whatever the hell that means. But I thought this latest episode was absolutely fantastic, and I might need a little bit of help interpreting how the episode ended. But it appeared to me as if we were at least getting a hint as to the origins of the great Fukuyama. But for fans of the unique style of this show, I feel like this episode had a lot of familiar ingredients that we all know and love. It had insanely cool music. It had one of those great little short films narrated by John Hamm that I like so much. Had a really dark, eerie, morbid, but very erotic sequence with somebody rising from the grave. And it wouldn't be an episode of Legion without some interesting interrogation sequences and some nightmarish revelations coming to the surface. The fact that this show only appeals to a niche audience continues to bewilder me because I feel like this is one of the few shows on television right now where in terms of technique and craftsmanship and storytelling and acting and writing that it equals, if not surpasses, most movies. I don't feel like we live in a world where it has to be an either or scenario. It's very easy to love both film and television, but I think a lot of times people look at television as the more narrative-driven format, whereas cinema is the more visually driven format. But the visual storytelling at play in most episodes of Legion makes most movies seem hopelessly trivial. That, of course, does not apply to Infinity War, which came out this past weekend, which is by far my favorite movie of the year. But enough procrastinating on my part, let's dig into some of the juicy morsels of this particular episode. So this episode picks up where the previous episode left off with Lenny arriving at Division 3. And Lenny, as we can all recall, kind of got her body destroyed when she and a wall unfortunately merged in the first season. So the fact that she's there in the flesh and not as a physical projection of the Shadow King's mind is cause for consternation, and the episode begins with Clark interrogating her, trying to figure out who she is, why her eyes have turned into this very eerie, kind of disturbing blue color, and how it's even possible for her to be there in the flesh. Lenny provides some interesting details about her bio and how she became a junkie. She talks about how when she was a little girl, she and her grandmother used to get hammered, and this is when Lenny was only 9 years old, but that was kind of the gateway into a life of substance abuse. And she keeps getting interrogated by different people, and all the while, all she wants to do is speak to David. Ptolemy comes to speak to her, and only Aubrey Plaza can deliver lines the way that she does. She says, you know, that whole evil Lenny thing, that was just pretending. My secret hope is that at some point, Lenny's mind ends up inside of David's mind. David's far too sane when he doesn't have multiple personalities competing for dominance. And as fans of the character in comics know, he has different powers for different personalities in his head. And I just feel like Lenny would be a wonderful addition to David's fractured mind. But in addition to these great interrogation sequences, we get this beautiful transition at one point to Oliver and Farouk on the road. And they do so with one of my favorite songs by the Velvet Underground and Nico, a song called Heroin. And if you haven't listened to that album, it's one of the all-time greats. If you are a fan of music from the 60s or early 70s, this is one of those albums that you can listen to for the rest of your life. But the scenes involving Oliver and Farouk are kind of disjointed and told out of sequence. We see them digging in a grave for a body. We see them using this mysterious device that was stolen from Division 3. And we also get a lot of interesting philosophical and intellectual debates between them about whether or not Homo superior, if it is even in fact unethical for Homo superior to kill Homo sapiens. It's almost like a lion taking down a gazelle, at least from Farouk's point of view. And Oliver, who's kind of secretly one of my favorite characters in the show, repeatedly tells Farouk that he plans on killing him and that the means by which he will do so will only become obvious when the moment strikes. By far my favorite scenes from Season 2 have been those that are narrated by John Hamm. In this one we get one called Chapter 6, Conspiracy. And he talks about human beings and their tendency to see patterns and how sometimes they'll see faces in a knot of wood or in a cloud, and how frequently people will see the face of Jesus in a piece of toast. Due to our yearning for seeing patterns in nature, that we actually sometimes will discount information that flies in the face of things that we already wish to believe. And that when it comes to whether or not something is a coincidence versus a conspiracy, often it's simply a matter of perspective, whether or not someone's an optimist or a pessimist, etc. But honestly, I could take an entire episode of just John Hamm philosophizing about all these various topics. But back in the present, David finally decides to pay Lenny a visit. And it's incredible just how confident Dan Stevens is in the part of David these days. When we first see him sitting there, there's something almost borderline terrifying about seeing him in full control over his faculties, able to read the minds of people in front of him. I feel like unless he's handicapped by insanity, he very quickly becomes an almost omnipotent figure. But Lenny repeatedly admits that she actually is there on behalf of the Shadow King, but she kind of is and she kind of isn't. She has no idea whose body she's in. But as David starts to piece together the narrative by reading her mind, we get this absolutely traumatizing sequence. It's probably the closest this show has come to delivering a scene that feels almost like a horror movie. We see this place out in the desert where the Dead Sea Donuts trucks pulls up and we see all these American soldiers are there on guard. Inside is David's sister, Amy. And Amy tells her husband that she's been having these dreams, and it's a dream that she's been having repeatedly where she envisions this figure with a basket on backwards on their head. And she also talks about how she sees herself with a mustache speaking in an almost musical tone of voice. And immediately I was thinking, are we seeing the kind of the origins of Fukuyama, or how Fukuyama came into being? And this is where I need a little bit of help, because Oliver and the Shadow King, they arrive, they completely incinerate her husband, and they proceed to torture the hell out of Amy before implanting Lenny into her body. So I guess my question is this: is Amy just having visions of Fukuyama, or at some point is David going to try and extract Lenny from his sister's body and somehow in the process splitting her into all these various pieces into a being that becomes Fukuyama? I was absolutely fascinated by it, but this is probably the first hook or the first mystery of the season that really has my curiosity on fire. I think Fukuyama is an absolutely brilliant creation, but clearly there's a direct link between Amy and that character, so I guess I'll just have to tune in next week to find out for sure. But I would love to hear people's theories, or if there's any information that I missed in this episode or in previous episodes that might connect all the dots, please let me know. So overall, I thought it was an absolutely fantastic episode. It was a nice reminder of why Legion is one of the most original shows that I've ever seen. And the good news is we have 6 more episodes to go before it draws to a close. I haven't seen any news yet whether or not FX and Noah Hawley want to do a season 3. I know the viewership is steady, but not great. I know FX also really likes the prestige of having such a critically acclaimed drama. But you never know, Noah Hawley might be ready to move on to other topics after this season. But I hope you enjoyed my recap and review. Please consider giving my channel a subscribe. Also, something I keep forgetting to plug in my videos, I recently produced a short animated movie called Cop Dog that's available on iTunes. The director behind it's a director, Bill Plimpton. But if you just go to iTunes and look up Cop Dog, there's a live action kids movie about a boy and his dog, and then there's the animated movie. But if you're a fan of animation, in particular hand-drawn animation, definitely give it a look, and you'd be doing me a huge favor if you would leave me a favorable rating. But if you want to talk more, leave a comment in the comments below, hunt me down on Twitter @Colbrax, and I'll be back at y'all tomorrow night to review the latest episode of The Expanse. Onwards and upwards.